Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and really try to unearth the most fascinating insights. We've all been there, right? Just drowning in information, maybe conflicting stuff, whether it's about, the latest health trend or some complex social issue. Today, our mission is to arm you with a powerful tool to cut through that noise. It's a method called meta-narrative review, and we'll explore it using some really groundbreaking research on how new ideas and products actually spread.
Exactly. And that's really the core challenge Greenhoff and her colleagues aimed to tackle in their paper. They were facing this huge complexity, trying to synthesize incredibly diverse research for actual policymaking. What's truly fascinating, I think, is how they use this meta-narrative approach. So essentially looking at the underlying stories or assumptions that different research traditions tell about a topic, and they use that to transform what just looked like contradictory data into, well, a really rich, cohesive understanding.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So imagine hitting a brick wall in your research. That's pretty much what Greenhoff and the team faced. They were trying to review studies on diffusion of innovations, how new things, technologies, practices, how they spread through society. This was for the UK Department of Health. But they found it impossible. Like even defining basic terms like innovation or what counts as a quality study, because every field had its own perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Some traditions swore by, deep qualitative interviews, getting the nuance. Others would only accept the really strict controls of randomized trials. Nothing else counted.
So a real clash.
Absolutely. They described it as a swamp, just confusing, often clashing information.
So the big question then is, how do you make sense of that kind of, intellectual chaos?
Right. So they turned to Thomas Kuhn's concept of scientific paradigms. Kuhn suggested that different research traditions basically view the world through a distinct lens. It's like a shared set of concepts, theories, methods, even tools, almost like a complete rule book for how that field sees things.
A specific worldview almost.
Pretty much. And an empirical finding from one paradigm might not even compute, might not make sense, viewed through another paradigm's lens.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Instead of trying to force everything into one, rigid box, they decided to map the inherent storylines of these different research traditions. They identified 13 key meta-narratives, and these came from fields as diverse as, like, rural sociology, marketing, clinical epidemiology, all over the place.
And what they realized was crucial. These seemingly conflicting findings weren't just random contradictions, they were actually higher-order data that could be explained by understanding the inherent tensions, the different assumptions between these paradigms.
Right, so the conflict itself tells a story.
You've hit on it. And those storylines really come alive when we look at specific examples. Take rural sociology. There was this landmark 1950 study by Ryan and Gross on hybrid corn adoption among Iowa farmers. It showed that classic S-shaped adoption curve, slow start, rapid growth, then leveling off.
Yeah, I've seen that curve.
Right. And it categorized farmers as innovators or laggards, often, frankly, quite disparagingly towards the laggards. But years later, the researcher Everett Rogers reflected on this. He realized it was driven by an unconscious pro-innovation bias.
An assumption baked in.
Exactly. The assumption within that paradigm was that all innovation is inherently good and should be adopted, full stop. He even recounted interviewing an organic farmer who was labeled a laggard for rejecting chemical fertilizers, but who in hindsight was actually way ahead of his time.
Wow, that's a powerful shift. Recognizing the bias in the lens itself. And this concept makes the next example even more revealing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Compare that to the meta-narrative from evidence-based medicine, or EBM.
Right. Here, innovation was often seen through a kind of a contagion metaphor, like a disease spreading.
Interesting metaphor.
Yeah, the idea was pretty simple. Research produces evidence, solid evidence, and that evidence then automatically changes doctor behavior, just like that. So the preferred method was the randomized controlled trial, the RCT, seen as the gold standard.
But it didn't always work out like that, did it?
Not quite. Many of these trials, despite being rigorous, had surprisingly low success in actually changing medical practice day to day. The assumption was, if you build the evidence, they will come. But reality is often more complex.
So what was the disconnect there? Why wasn't the evidence enough?
Well, this is a key insight. Even really rigorous data can fall flat if it ignores the human or the systemic context. Studies showed these evidence-based guidelines were often, ambiguous, or really hard to apply to individual patients with unique needs, or they required huge system-wide changes that the EBM paradigm just didn't really account for. Its mental model was a bit too simplistic, maybe?
Makes sense. The real world gets in the way.
Exactly. Then you have another tradition, knowledge utilization. This one sees innovation more as the creation and, crucially, the transmission of knowledge. A great example they used was an ethnographic study by Brown and Duguid. They studied Xerox photocopier repairers. Deep dive, observing them. And they found that the really critical knowledge, the tacit knowledge, the real know-how, the stuff you learn from experience, not a book.
Yeah, the unspoken wisdom.
Precisely. That wasn't in the official manuals. It was exchanged informally, through stories, anecdotes, often just chatting in the canteen.
Fascinating. So, okay, bringing this all together, what does this meta-narrative approach really mean for you, listening right now?
Well, the review isn't just about, summing up what's out there. It's much deeper. It's about diving into the history, the context of different ways of researching something, understanding their built-in biases, their assumptions, and then using those differences, those tensions, to explain why things sometimes seem to contradict each other.
So it shows how the same problem can be investigated so differently, leading to findings that only really make sense when you understand the underlying story each approach is telling. And this isn't just for academics, right? It's about how you approach any complex problem. Choosing a product, understanding world events, it gives you a tool to see past just the surface noise.
Absolutely. And this approach, I think, highlights a really crucial principle for anyone trying to get properly informed: pluralism. No single theory, no single viewpoint is going to explain everything perfectly, and we really have to avoid privileging one perspective over others automatically. Instead, we should actively expose and explore the tensions between different perspectives. That's how you build a richer, more nuanced picture of reality.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that the messiness, the heterogeneity, isn't just a problem to be fixed. It's actually data to be analyzed. So maybe the next time you encounter conflicting information, ask yourself, what are the underlying storylines potentially at play here? What different lenses might be shaping these different findings? It's a really powerful way, I think, to turn confusion into clarity and gain a truly deep understanding.